Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am sharing a fun fat quarter friendly pattern that works up so quickly. I am calling it Fallon's Fat Quarter Race. Why a fat quarter race? Well, because jelly rolls shouldn't have all the fun, right? Let me know in the comments if you've ever made a jelly roll race quilt before. If you have, then you'll probably find this pattern very familiar and you'll be very comfortable putting it together. This one is a little bit different though. This pattern works up so fast and makes a great gift quilt or charity quilt. The top piece is together in just hours, 2 to 4 depending on the method you choose. For this quilt pattern, we are going to be grabbing 12 fat quarters and then we'll be off to the races. I was inspired by the Jelly Roll Race quilt pattern and thought, why not do it my own way? That's what makes art fun, taking inspiration from different things you see and putting your own flair to it. I'm going to make this quilt 2 different ways because I want anybody to be able to make this quilt no matter where they are in their quilting journey. For one version of this quilt, I'm going to be taking 12 fat quarters and I'm going to be using this Sanctuary line of fabric when I do this version. And when I cut the strips, you'll see what that means in a minute. When I cut the strips and sew them together end to end, I'm going to miter those ends to give it just a little bit of a different look. Now with the other version of the quilt, I'm going to be using fabric from the Scandinavian Winter line of fabric. And this is going to be a lot more of a Christmassy or winter inspired quilt. And for that one, after I cut the strips, they're just going to be sewed together with a straight edge. So this version will be a little bit easier for those who are beginners to sew. But if you want to test your quilt skills a little bit more and try something different, I think you would be able to do the mitered edges as well. But you'll be able to see 2 different versions and decide which route you want to go when making this quilt. Or make both versions like I did. Now, if you want to pull fat quarters from your stash, take a look at this scrappier version I did. It still looks amazing with fabrics that were not perfectly coordinated. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, so let's start the prep work for this project. So first I am going to starch the fabrics because whenever I am sewing long strips together, I really like to give the fabric a little more stability. However, this time around I'm going to use the flatter spray. I really love the way it smells. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this. It's not a really heavy starch, but I think it'll be enough to really help me piece this quilt together a little bit easier. So to do that, I like to spray the back of the fat quarter and lay it down and just keep going through all the fat quarters I'm going to be using, misting the back of the fat quarter. And then whenever I am ready to press them, I flip the pile around so that the first one I sprayed is getting pressed first. And then it's had time to dry just a little bit. I'm going to use my easy press to press these. Whenever I'm pressing a lot of fabric, I like to use that press because it seems to go a little bit faster since it has a larger surface area.
After pressing our fabric, we will then move on to cutting our strips.
Now from each fat quarter, we are going to cut 2 3.5-inch strips and 4 2.5-inch strips. So to do this, I like to square up the bottom of my fat quarters, the left side of my fat quarters, and the top of my fat quarter. And I typically cut 3 to 4 fat quarters at a time. I have 4 fat quarters layered here, and I just have them lined up with the salvage end at the top so I can try to kind of get them as straight as I can. So I'm going to square up the left, the top, and the bottom of this stack of fat quarters right now. All right, now that my stack of fat quarters is all squared up. I have the bottom, the top, and the left side squared up. I'm going to start cutting my strips. So I'm going to cut my two 3.5-inch strips first, and I'm going to keep these strip sets organized together. So I have my first 3.5-inch strip, and how I cut that is I lined up the 3.5-inch line with the side of my freshly cut strip. And then I also like to choose lines on my ruler at the top and the bottom and make sure they're lined up as well. That just makes sure my strips are nice and even. So I'm going to keep this stack of 3.5-inch strips together and move them to the side. And I'm going to cut another 3.5-inch strip set, keeping everything lined up as best as I can. And then I'm going to cut 4 2.5-inch strip sets. So I have 1, 2, 3. So how we're going to organize these is from each fat quarter, you're going to get 2 3.5 inches. And we're going to put those together in a pile. And then you're going to have 2 piles with 2.5-inch strips. So when you're done cutting all of your fat quarters, you're going to have 1 stack that has all of your 3.5-inch strips, and then 2 stacks that have your 2.5-inch strips in it. So get all of your fat quarters cut and organize them into these piles of 3.5-inch and 2 with 2.5-inch strips. All right, so now that we finally have all of our prep work done, we can finally start sewing. So you will have 3 different piles. Remember, you'll have the 3.5-inch piles and 2 piles of strips that are 2.5 inches. So you're going to be sewing those together end to end. Now you're going to end up with 3 very long strips all sewn together. So you'll have 1 long strip with the 3.5-inch, 1 long strip with the 2.5-inch, and another long strip of the 2.5-inch. So you can kind of go 2 different routes here. You can sew them together with a straight seam, or you can miter the seam. So if you choose to miter your seam when you're sewing all of these strips together, you can sew an extra set of stitches along there and have an instant half square triangle that you can toss into your scrap bin with every intention to use, but likely never will. So with the 2 different options for sewing the strips together, hopefully you'll see that either option will really create a very gorgeous quilt. So you can choose either one of them, and you know, one will obviously sew up a lot faster with that straight seam, but the other, maybe with the mitered seam, you might want to test out your skills and try something new. So let's get started. Stitch. So here's a little tip when you are sewing these strips together. If you don't want to have to cut your thread between each stitch, you can bring the top fabric up after you've stitched across it and make sure it's laying right sides up, and then get your next strip, put it right sides together, and sew your next row of stitches. And then just keep doing that. Bring that top fabric up with the right side facing up. Put your next strip down right sides together and sew across your 1/4-inch seam. So hopefully that will help you move through this a little bit faster, because it is a lot of strips to sew together. And then if you have a thread cutter that works really well for cutting threads that are chain piece, it'll work really well here to just separate them all, or you can just use some little snips that you have. So if you are choosing to sew a straight seam, you will do this same thing for all of your strip sets. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to get that mitered seam. So this is how I like to do it. I set my first strip down right side up on my sewing machine area. And then I take the next strip and put it right sides facing together with it squared up perfectly, and the strip on top is facing me. Once I get it lined up, I rotate the strip so that the corner at the top of the strip that's facing right side up is right at the needle. And then the corner that is on the diagonal other side, I line it up with the red line on my diagonal seam tape. That line is lined up with my needle. And then I sew across, making sure that this point stays lined up with that red line. And so I'm going to show you that gets you that mitered seam. So I'm going to show it to you again, getting another strip. So I put it back laying horizontal on my sewing table, and then I take another strip and put it right sides together on top, and then I turn it so that the point on the top strip is lined up with the needle, and that point is right along the bottom strip with the right side facing up. And then I get that point on the bottom strip that is diagonal with the needle lined up with my diagonal seam tape that is red. Now, just like with the sewing of the straight seam, to make this go a little bit faster so that you aren't snipping each time, you can take that top strip and lay it right side up. So I just kind of fold it there and then grab my next strip, lay it right side together, and get it lined up and ready to sew. Now, if you don't have diagonal seam tape, I highly recommend you get it because it makes it so much faster than having to draw lines or fold lines. I will put it as a link in the description. And see, I folded that top one right side up. And I'm going to get the next one to put on. So if you don't have diagonal seam tape or anything like that, you can fold a crease in this. So see how I'm just taking the top one and folding it down so that you bring the top fold over to the side. That'll kind of get that middle line for you, and you could press this with your iron, whatever you need to do to get a crease so you can see it well enough to just sew along with that. You could also just get the crease a little bit and then draw a line with a marking utensil that you like to use. But that's a way to do this if you don't have the diagonal seam tape. So I'm going to sew across there. All right, so if you are wanting to set another row of stitches so that you can get the half square triangles, this is why I have another row of the diagonal seam tape, because I can line this stitched line up with the second set of red marking on my diagonal seam tape. So I line that stitch that I first did along that red line, and that is a ½ inch away from the first red line that I have here on the diagonal seam tape. So if I keep this line of stitches lined up with that red line, I'll get an extra row of stitches here. So when I cut off this tail here, right between here, I'll have a half square triangle that I can use later. All right, so I'm gonna get the rest of these strip sets in the Sanctuary line sewn. Then I will press the seams. Then I will be ready to go with the next step. Now, if you decided to miter your edges, what you're going to do is trim a 1/4 inch away from your stitches. If you stitch the second row of stitches, then you will have that half square triangle on all these. So you'll do that with all of your strips that you mitered together end to end. So just trim a 1/4 inch away. I like to use this 1/4 inch seam allowance ruler. It just makes it really quick because I line up that blue edge right with the stitches and trim away. All right, so now that you have your strips all pressed, what we're going to do is sew one of the 2.5 inch strips along either side of the 3.5 inch strips. Now you may want to offset them a little, so you could start the 2.5 inch a little bit longer than the 3.5 inch along both sides.
After sewing the 2.5 inch strips onto either side of the 3.5 inch strips, it is time to start finishing the quilt top.
All right, so now that we have our wide strip set sewn, so we have the 3.5 inch in the middle and the 2.5 inch on either side, and this is an extremely long strip. So once you got that sewed, you're going to square up both ends of it so that it's nice and even. Then you will fold it together. So take one end, put it right sides together with the other end, and then we're just going to sew a long 1/4 inch seam along the edge. So you're only going to do this on one side, and then when you get to the end, we're going to cut the strip set in half. I like to backstitch here just because it's a really, really long sew that we're going to do. And I just like to make sure that it's nice and secure because there can be a lot of weight pulling on this once you start moving it around. It just makes me feel more comfortable. So just adjust it. Now, if you didn't get these right sides together, where when you get to the end, there's no twists in it, it is going to be a little bit tricky to cut it in half, but it is doable. Just cut slowly across there. All right, so I'm just going to keep sewing until I get to the end. All right, so when you start getting close to the end, make sure you leave yourself some room to snip that fold, to snip across the fold. So I just do this part with scissors. I just leave myself an opening there and just snip right across. Now, when you brought this right side together at the beginning, there could be a twist here if it's a really long strip, so it's hard to fold it and make sure that it's folded evenly. So when you get down to the end, you might want to leave yourself a little bit of room and snip across carefully and then fold it as you go. Even it out and then just sew to the end. So I backstitch again just to make sure that seam stays nice and secure. So right now you could take this over to your pressing area and press the seam. I am just going to keep sewing. Once I'm at the sewing machine, I like to stay at the sewing machine as long as I can. Look at, I just love these prints. This is the Sanctuary line of fabric and it is just gorgeous. So I'm just going to open this up, and What's nice is each time you bring this quilt, all these strips back together, is that seam gets shorter and shorter to sew. So you're just going to keep doing this until you get the length and width of the quilt that you would like. So once you have sewn to the end of that seam and snipped it in half, you just bring it back together and sew along the seam again. And then press your quilt's seams after all of that sewing and getting it to the length and width you'd like. And just like that, your quilt is finished. It comes together so fast. What do you think? All right, so I really hope that you enjoyed making Fallon's fat quarter race. If you do plan to make this quilt, let me know in the comments. And if you look in the description of this video, you'll find the different social medias that I'm on. And I would love for you to tag me in photos. You can use the hashtag #FatQuarterRace. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.